I was a huge fan of the movie Longlegs last year. Seemingly came out of nowhere, was just a huge surprise. I went in totally blind and came out very happy with it. Not even instantly, like it took me actually kind of a little bit to come around to it, because I didn't even really know how I felt coming straight out of the movie. It just takes a lot of wild turns and twists. And I felt a bit blindsided by it, and then it ended up becoming, I think, my second favorite movie of 2024. So I was obviously going to be interested in what Osgood Perkins was doing next, and it was looking like it was going to be The Monkey, an adaptation of a Stephen King story. And I just thought that the idea of him tackling a Stephen King story is just going to be an interesting concept. It really is an interesting choice to go after you have this success of Longlegs. Even though he might have already been fully into making The Monkey by the time Longlegs came out, because there was only like a 7-month turnaround, I think, between Longlegs and this. And just for reference too, I haven't read the book actually, so I'm just coming at this straight up as the story itself and the movie. And by the way, I'm going to be going into not spoilers. I'm not going to be talking about the ending or anything like that, but I will be talking about some character details and some themes that I think, you might get a different experience if I tell you these things. So I'd kind of, watch this video with caution if you haven't seen the movie. Maybe go see the movie first and the video would make more sense. But this just seemed like a movie that was right up my alley. A movie like this where it doesn't take itself too seriously, it has a fun premise, and the idea of this monkey that causes death. And even though I was expecting a pretty different tone from Longlegs, that movie is obviously very self-serious. It takes itself and its world seriously. I'm still kind of flustered by some of the comedic aspects and the tonal shifts throughout this movie because it's a pretty wild ride. And I was a bit kind of blindsided by how comedically structured and executed this movie was. I mean, obviously, like I said, this is going to be a fun premise and it's kind of awkward to take something like this just so damn seriously. But I was still a bit shocked by how much so it was and how it almost felt like it had a bit of a satirical edge to it. It's very much in the vein of a dark comedy with a horror hook, and I really like stuff like that. But it also has a little bit more meat on the bone to chew on, It comes off a bit unassuming because it is so slapstickish with all these kind of absurd ways of people dying. But at the core of the story is actually kind of a very bleak exploration about how random and just really sudden that death is, and that's something that is a very common fear among people. The fact that it can come at any time with no warning, and how death chooses people can be pretty damn unfair or feel very damn unfair at times. But the movie just treats death in a way that's so a matter of fact, and that's where the dark comedy comes in. And I think that that's where it really works. Like, death is treated so weirdly flippantly throughout this movie, and some of the absurdity of treating it that way is the comedic effect. But it also reinforces the actual overall point that the movie is trying to make about kind of the random and unfair nature of death. And also going into a bit more character stuff, you see this in the way that Hal, the main character, lives his life, and kind of the difference between him and his brother Bill. Hal lives in a way where he doesn't want to expose himself to kind of the danger and the inevitability of death, having people close to him die, and that's why he isolates himself from his son, his brother, his ex, his family. A lot of people that deal with the difficulties that death brings have issues of not wanting to leave themselves vulnerable to be hurt by something like that, especially when it's so chaotic, so unpredictable. They close people out because they don't want to be left vulnerable or open to being exposed in that way. And then you have his brother Bill, who, after what goes on in their childhood, which is the first portion of the movie, gets an obsession with actually controlling death, controlling the monkey, when death is just a hammer looking for a nail. It's completely unpredictable, you cannot control it, and it comes to us all. It's kind of simple, basic, but it has very universal application. But it also makes for that insane tonal tightrope that I've talked about. I think the movie handles that aspect actually incredibly well, and that's a very fine line to walk, because really, if you top heavy on one or the other, it totally derails everything. And when you're treating things just so absurdly in the way that this movie does, that's difficult to maintain through a 90-minute runtime. It's funny because it takes such dark and morbid themes, like the randomness of death and how we treat it, and just extrapolates that concept to just comedically show the absurdity of just the nature of it and how random it is. It's clever, it's actually pretty funny. And with that, I just overall appreciate what the movie itself is going for. It's almost like Final Destination, but unlike Final Destination, it doesn't have that self-seriousness or that kind of earnestness to it that Final Destination does. And it's because it has that emphasis on the absurdity of death. Final Destination is mainly fun because it finds absurd ways to kill people, and it takes its world entirely seriously. Like, it doesn't feel like there's any kind of mask on what Final Destination is. It just is what it is. And the monkey's kind of interested in taking the opposite approach to that. Final Destination doesn't necessarily treat death flippantly. People die in crazy ways. It can obviously be darkly comedic at times, but they put a lot more weight behind the death in Final Destination, whereas it feels like the monkey kind of takes the shit happens attitude towards death. In the monkey, where death feels like this chaotic force of nature that you can't control no matter how hard you try to, part of the thematic structure of it. In Final Destination, death feels a lot more deliberate. There's a design, and it's all very calculated. It feels like none of that in the monkey because it uses the monkey almost not as a metaphor, but as kind of a glass ceiling to tell the story, which really is just about death, trying to control death, the randomness of it, how it comes to us all despite our best efforts to control it, we cannot. And that is the core of what I appreciate about it. It is the fact that it's so tonally weird, but it ropes back around to actually being thematically relevant, and it can be taken seriously in a weird way while also being very funny in the opposite. I mean, I think that that's what dark comedies do best. They shine a reflection to that. And that's what I really liked about The Monkey. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section. I'd love to hear your take on this movie. Do you see the same things I do? Do you feel differently? I'd love to hear. I'm GM Light. Have a good one.